You think the battle ends when the last cannon fires. You imagine silence spreading across the fields, a fragile calm where victory and loss catch their breath. But sometimes, silence isn't peace. It's the moment when horror begins to speak in whispers that history tries to forget. Before we dive deeper into this forgotten aftermath, take a moment to join our growing community of history seekers across the world. Whether you're watching from Istanbul, Warsaw, or somewhere far beyond the lands once ruled by empire, let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from. Every like and subscribe helps us uncover the truths buried beneath centuries of silence and reminds us how global our curiosity for the past truly is. The year was 1526. The air over Mohat was thick with the stench of gunpowder and death. Crows wheeled above fields strewn with corpses, their black wings glinting in the late summer light. King Louis II of Hungary lay drowned in a marsh, his armor dragging him down into the mud that swallowed both crown and courage. The Ottoman banners still fluttered over the blood-soaked plain, red cloth streaked with soot and the sweat of victory. To the soldiers of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, the battle had ended. But for the women of Hungary, for the wives, sisters, and daughters who waited behind shattered walls, it had just begun. They came not as soldiers now, but as harvesters. The irregular cavalry, the Akıncı, fanned across the countryside like a spreading fire. They were not paid in coin. Their reward was whatever they could take. The empire called it right of conquest. The men called it fortune. In the smoke of burning villages, fortune often wore a human face. Eyewitness accounts from Christian chroniclers, men like Miklos Istvanfi, speak of lines of women herded together with rope, children clinging to their skirts, the elderly driven forward at sword point. The fields, one wrote, were filled not with cries of war, but with the sound of weeping. Church bells that once called the faithful to prayer now rang under the hands of looters, melted down to coin, or left silent, mute witnesses to a new order. In the Ottoman command tents, the process had already begun to formalize. There were registers, neat lines of names and numbers, tallies of the living and the taken. The system had a cold logic to it. For every conquered town, for every village surrendered or burned, captives were divided like spoils. The most beautiful were set aside for transport. Others, those deemed unfit or too old, were left behind. The machine of conquest didn't pause for grief. It calculated it. At night, the fires of the villages cast flickering shadows over the plains. Travelers passing through weeks later reported seeing skeletal remains still bound together by rusted chains, left where they fell during forced marches. The Akıncı called these women ganimet, the lawful bounty of victory. But among them, a darker understanding spread. This was no chaotic looting. This was order disguised as ruin. In the following days, Ottoman scribes moved through the captured settlements, recording livestock, grain, and human property. The parchment crackled as quills scratched out value beside names. A girl of 15, worth more than a horse. A mother with an infant, worth less than a mule. It was conquest transformed into ledger, civilization reduced to arithmetic. One story survived from the small village of Peks. A widow named Ersebet reportedly hid 6 girls inside the bell tower of her church. When Ottoman scouts arrived, she refused to reveal their location, even under threat. According to a local priest's later account, her last words before being cut down were, "You cannot sell what you cannot find." The girls were discovered days later, starved but alive. Ersebet's defiance, forgotten in most chronicles, flickers like a brief candle against the storm of her time. As word spread across the Hungarian plains, fear began to travel faster than the soldiers themselves. Villages emptied overnight. Families fled into forests or across rivers, leaving behind homes, livestock, and churches. For many, surrender seemed safer than defiance. But the empire's laws were clear. Non-Muslim populations captured in war were spoils of the state. Mercy had to be purchased, and often it never arrived. In Suleiman's own campaign diaries, now preserved in Istanbul, the entries for these days are strikingly silent. They speak of logistics, supplies, weather, but never of the aftermath in the villages. Between lines about road repairs and bridge building lies the quiet omission of thousands of human lives. History often hides its worst truths in the spaces between words. The Ottoman army moved northward, leaving behind a wasteland. What they carried was not gold or relics, it was people. Caravans of captives stretched for miles, guarded by soldiers too weary to notice the difference between victory and crime. Along the way, the sick and the weak were left to die by the roadside. Their bodies mark the path of a conquest better than any milestone. As autumn settled over the plains, the once proud kingdom of Hungary had become a silent corridor, a land between empires, stripped of its sons and haunted by the ghosts of its daughters. The soldiers called it the price of war. The merchants called it opportunity, and the women who survived learned a truth that would echo for centuries. Sometimes the end of battle is only the beginning of captivity. When the last fires burned low and the ravens settled in the ruins, even the wind seemed to carry a different sound, something between a sigh and a prayer. For the victors, it was the breath of empire. For the conquered, it was the whisper of a wound that would never truly heal. The guns had fallen silent, but in the silence, the screams had only begun. The morning sun rose over Istanbul like molten gold spilling across a city of domes and minarets. From the Galata docks to the Grand Bazaar's winding arteries, everything shimmered with life. Coins clinking, horses stamping, traders shouting prices in a dozen tongues. But beneath the echo of commerce and the scent of roasted spices, another rhythm pulsed. One that spoke not of silk or spices, but of skin. In the shadowed courtyards near the slave markets, the sound changed. The clatter of coins gave way to the rustle of parchment, the shuffle of bare feet on stone. A scribe dipped his quill into ink and recorded a name, though not the real one. Fatma, he wrote, though she had been Katerina 3 days before. Her hair, once braided in the manner of the Balkans, was now covered by a thin linen veil. Her wrists bore faint red lines where the ropes had bitten deep. Here, conquest transformed into commerce. The Ottoman slave markets were not chaotic pits of barbarity as later imagination might suggest. They were precise, organized, bureaucratic. The men who presided over them were not brutes in rags but accountants of flesh, calm, methodical, efficient. Under the morning light their ledgers gleamed with neat columns of ink. Origin, age, height, complexion, teeth. Each entry was a life reduced to data. A merchant, his turban wound tight and his robe perfumed with musk, approached a group of captives. "This one, 16, strong arms." He tilted her chin with a gloved hand, assessing not her strength but her symmetry. A nod. "Fair enough, she'll fetch 80 akshi." The girl's eyes darted toward the door. It was not escape she sought, only air. The room was thick with the scent of sweat and fear, with the faint sweetness of rosewater sprinkled to mask it. The scribes continued to write. Outside, the call to prayer rose from the blue mosque, a sound so pure it seemed to cleanse the air. Yet, only a few streets away, purity itself was being priced. How many lives had passed through these courtyards unseen by history? How many voices silenced beneath the weight of commerce? The empire's splendor, its gardens, fountains, and palaces, shimmered like a mirage built atop invisible suffering. Every silken curtain in Topkapi, every jeweled chalice bore the echo of this trade. Eyewitness accounts tell of vast sorting stations along the empire's frontier roads, where soldiers delivered the captured to merchants like livestock to handlers. There, the human body became currency. The young and beautiful fetched higher prices. The elderly or wounded were bartered in groups, discounted as if spoiled goods. A chronicler from Ragusa wrote of seeing mothers separated from children, their cries softened by the sea wind, as if nature itself refused to carry their grief too far. In Istanbul, the sorting continued. Beneath the grand domes where sunlight danced on tiles of turquoise and gold, shadows moved differently. Buyers walked with measured steps, speaking in low tones. A hand gesture, a lifted brow, a whisper to the scribe. All could decide a person's fate. One document preserved in the archives of Bursa records a sale. Item: Georgian girl, 14. Price 105 akçe. Destination: Edirne household. No name, no family, only destination. In one corner of the market, an elderly eunuch with sharp eyes and a voice like sand commanded a small group of girls to kneel. "Head high," he said softly. "Do not weep. It lowers your value." His words, though cruel, carried a strange tenderness. He too had once been part of this trade, a boy taken from his home beyond the Black Sea. Now he was its instrument. What thoughts crossed his mind as he watched the cycle repeat? Did he remember his own name before it was erased? A warm wind carried the scent of the Bosporus into the courtyard, salt and jasmine mixing with the coppery tang of blood from freshly branded captives. The branding iron hissed as it touched skin, a quiet reminder that belonging was no longer a matter of birth, but of ownership. By midday, the market's rhythm quickened. Buyers from Syria, Egypt, and Anatolia crowded the gates. Bargains were struck, contracts sealed with ink and wax. A caravan master from Damascus smiled as he inspected his new purchase. "She will learn fast," he murmured. His companion laughed. "They always do." When evening fell, the traders counted their coins beneath the crimson sky. The city glowed, lanterns flickering on the Bosporus like floating embers. Somewhere across the water, the palace musicians began to play, soft strings drifting through the air like a lullaby for the empire's conscience. But down in the courtyards, silence reclaimed the space. Only the rustle of chains remained, a metallic whisper echoing off the stone. The scribes rolled up their ledgers and extinguished their lamps. The eunuch locked the gate. And as darkness settled, one could almost imagine the ghosts of the captives standing beside their sleeping bodies, whispering their true names into the wind, hoping the night would carry them home. Tomorrow, the markets would open again. The ledgers would be rewritten. The empire would continue to shine, golden above, blood-stained below. Because in Istanbul, beneath the domes of light, the trade never truly ended. It only changed its name. The wind moves differently through ruins. It doesn't rush, it lingers, curling through cracks in old walls and hollow doorways as if searching for names once spoken there. On the plains of southern Hungary and the forgotten barracks of Edirne, that wind still carries whispers. Faint, fragmented, but insistent. It is not the echo of war drums, but of lullabies sung by women whose voices never reached home. Centuries have passed since the markets of flesh fell silent, but silence is deceptive. Beneath the soil of former Ottoman garrisons, bones still surface, some marked with chains, others with small silver crosses hidden in their palms. Archaeologists call them anomalies. Historians call them evidence. Yet, what are they truly but fragments of erased lives? The Ottoman records remain clinical in their precision. Ledgers written in graceful Arabic script describe property transfers, births, and household transactions. A child born of Christian mother, now raised as Muslim. One entry reads, "No name, only lineage." No mention of the woman's tears when the imam recited her child's new name, one that sounded foreign even to her tongue. Modern geneticists have traced these hidden inheritances. Mitochondrial DNA, passed from mother to child, has revealed that in certain Anatolian and Balkan villages, up to 1/3 of maternal lines trace back to the very regions once ravaged by Ottoman conquest. The data speaks in percentages, but behind every number lies a story. Of a girl taken from a valley in Croatia, of a child born beneath the crescent moon in Bursa, of a grandmother's hair that shines like a stranger's memory. The empire may have recorded victories and taxes, but not these quiet genealogies of survival. Still, they endure. In the archives of Topkapi, among the dust and decay of forgotten documents, a single piece of parchment bears a faint handprint, smaller than a man's, smudged as if pressed in haste. Beside it, the faint trace of words, "May my son remember." The ink has faded, but the plea has not. How does one measure a history that refuses to die, yet cannot be told? A historian in the 19th century, translating Ottoman records in Vienna, once wrote of finding a strange melancholy between the lines. Their empire, he noted, was built not merely by conquest of land, but by the absorption of humanity itself. He was closer to the truth than he realized. The empire did not erase its captives. It absorbed them, turning pain into lineage, blood into belonging. In a remote Anatolian village, oral traditions still whisper of the pale grandmothers. Women said to have come from beyond the river centuries ago. No one remembers their names, only that their eyes were light, their songs foreign. Their descendants now pray in Arabic, wear the crescent, and speak Turkish, yet their faces bear traces of another world. History may have buried their origins, but biology kept the map. One Ottoman official's diary from the mid-16th century records a haunting moment. During a census in the Balkans, he met a woman who refused to speak. She had been captured years before, converted, and given in marriage to a cavalryman. Her silence, he wrote, was deeper than defiance. It was memory. What did that silence carry? Was it grief or endurance? The historian who found that diary centuries later described how the ink had bled through the page, like veins spreading across parchment. The paper itself refusing to forget. Even in the empire's twilight, when its walls crumbled and its heirs scattered, the legacy of those women lingered. Ottoman nobles of later centuries boasted of Circassian or Georgian ancestry, their beauty praised in poetry and courtly tales. But few remembered, or wished to remember, how those ancestors had arrived. The empire had learned the art of selective memory, to keep the splendor, but lose the sorrow. And yet sorrow never truly leaves. It seeps into lullabies, into gestures passed down unconsciously. In certain folk songs of Anatolia, linguists have detected fragments of Slavic melodies. In prayers whispered by elderly women in the Balkans, the rhythm of Turkish speech still flickers beneath Christian hymns, cultures entwined by violence, now indistinguishable in their grief. On a cold evening in modern-day Edirne, the camera might linger on the ruins of an old caravanserai. The moonlight falls across a weathered wall, revealing faint scratches. Letters almost gone. Perhaps a prayer, perhaps a name. The stone refuses to speak clearly, but the pattern suggests a hand desperate to be remembered. In that silence lies the entire story of empire, not its banners or victories, but its quiet aftermath. The Ottomans built one of the greatest powers the world had ever seen, and in doing so, created one of its most intricate webs of loss. Every dynasty that followed, every noble line that traced its heritage to Istanbul, carries within it the pulse of those forgotten women. The empire may have turned them into numbers, into property, into nothing, but time betrayed the lie. Their blood endured, flowing invisibly through the veins of those who once claimed to own them. Now, centuries later, science has begun to reveal what history hid. But the question remains: can acknowledgement undo erasure? Can DNA resurrect dignity? Perhaps not. As the camera fades on the ruins of Mohacs and the skyline of Istanbul beyond, the wind rises again, soft, almost tender. It carries with it a murmur, neither Ottoman nor European, but something in between. A voice, perhaps, saying only this: "We are still here." And then, silence.